Hey, hail, my friends. Welcome to the Wednesday Vibe Rant. We have a special conversation for you tonight. In my opinion, this will be special because it's like the meeting of two minds that really should have met a long time ago. And so here's the intention, okay? Everybody knows LC King. Everybody knows Topher. But Topher and LC King don't know each other. So this is what we're going to watch happen. Literally, sparks are going to fly. I'm going to send them off talking to each other about electricity. Basically, this is inspired from back in September when the Beartaria Festival happened. Topher here gave an awesome talk about like geometry and phi and electricity and cavitation and all of these wild things relating to like the fluid dynamics of what is current and how all that works. And we've gotten little snippets of it from him, you know, here and there. He's just always ladling good stuff, but this is maybe going to be more of a not structured in like a rigid way, but I don't think he made a PowerPoint or anything. But Topher is going to lead us through some of the highlights or do his best to sort of recreate that talk for us. And then we're going to riff on it. And first, I think, though, what would be great is to let Lucas and Topher introduce themselves to each other and their work to each other so that, we can get this ball off on the right foot.
Okay, go.
Yeah, you first, Lucas. Very polite,
so
both of you.
it was probably 5 years ago now that I've been doing sort of YouTube stuff, and basically what I was trying to do was find out the flat Earth model based on electricity, I guess, and I sort of fell into that really. And what I was doing was applying the galvanic cell and electrolysis to how the sun and moon and all that operate. And so seeing that the oceans are an electrolyte, the earth is a salt bridge, and the moon is a anode and the sun is a cathode. And so it was basically my research into all that and how that, and then it just gave a basic understanding of electricity and all these different things and how it all sort of fits together into one sort of complete unit. So that was my claim to fame, I guess, on YouTube. And then I do sort of other stuff relating to calendars and occult sort of stuff as well on the side.
Yeah, a lot of stuff and things on the side.
Yeah.
Synodic periods and great gematria breakdowns. I mean, there's a wide range of things that you have a lot of awesome research and expertise in. So things that Topher is very, very aligned with in his own perspectives. But Topher, what do you do, buddy? Oh, I got you muted. Okay, start over.
I do a few things. I always back into electricity. I just want to be clear about that. I've been a body worker professionally for 23 years. Yeah, I was trained in polarity therapy, which is essentially, it's really just Ayurvedic massage that's rebranded. And a lot of that has a lot to do with how the negative, there you go. Exactly. Yep. Dr. Randolph Stone. I went to his institute in Austin, Texas. So, yeah, Dr. Stone's work was brilliant for me because I grew up in a family of, well, no one was professional massaging, but a lot of healers in my family. So I grew up with always having the phenomenology of touch. And I would get really sick when I was in Florida massaging people. And I lived in an ashram and I ended up moving to Costa Rica, and my energetics completely flipped when I moved to Costa Rica because I started doing earth building. And I noticed that my energetics would completely ground out because I was literally building with earth. I would build super adobe buildings and build cob buildings, which we call bareke. And so I would have my feet stomping clay into coconut fiber a couple hours a day, or I'd be like compacting, a rammed earth house. And I found that I could massage 6 to 8 people a day and never get the sickness that I got in Florida. And I really started to look into this whole notion of grounding. And at the same time, I was noticing a lot of these earth bag houses look like these massive coils to me. Like they're literally like a beehive coil. And I was like, I've seen earthen batteries like this. Like if I was just to connect each, cylinder, the galvanized metal that we have along every 5 inches, if I was just to connect that, put the ground in the ground and then have, my positive up 20 feet above the ground, I could derive a current. And I just saw it one day. I was like, this is the way structures are supposed to be. Structures are supposed to give the energy that's needed for the structure. It shouldn't be coming from somewhere else. It doesn't need to. So, and at the same time, I was endeavoring to learn about orgone, and a friend of mine, I've been talking to Chance a lot about this guy. He developed, you're from Australia, right, LC King?
Yeah, that's correct.
Did you ever hear of the Joe cell?
Yes, I've heard of it, but you'll have to remind me what it is.
So the Joe cell was essentially a cylinder within a cylinder within a cylinder that was stainless steel, and they would run a 12-volt charge at a certain frequency to the cathode and the anode of the cell, and it would produce orgone. And the orgone, they would tap to the engine.
Yeah,
and
I remember now.
The engines, you could have an engine, run very efficiently, let's just say. And it wasn't like pumping hydrogen into, or Brown's gas into the air intake. So I was working with this guy that invented this system, and got really into water. And
Is this when the black helicopter showed up?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we got 2 of these cells in resonance because we figured out to get any of this stuff to work, they're like tuning forks, which Chance would love. You have to get everything in a resonant, coherent pattern. So we were using function generators, and we were using, I don't know the technical name of it. It's an oscillating generator that changes the oscillation rate to get us to get the water to create orgone. And we got it to work in the middle of Palm Beach County, Florida, and we got visited the next day. Well, within 6 hours, we were visited by black whoop choppers. But the whole thing that I've been working on is like I got into domes, I got into water, structuring water. I got into all these things from like a health and prosperity perspective. And I've been working on every one of those things since then. So I guess I've been in that world now for 14, 15 years now. So that's what I've been up to.
Yeah. So, all right, Lucas, you got any questions? Come on.
No, I'm sort of sitting back enjoying this, enjoying what you're telling us. So
one really cool thing, Lucas, because you brought up the flat earth thing. So I got into the work of this Dr. Floyd suite when I was trying to structure water for my cells and for my body. Because I had a couple of water structuring inventions that I worked on for quite a while. And Floyd Sweet, he talked about how the model of magnetics is completely wrong. Like the model of where like you have a North Pole and a South Pole on a magnet, that's not actually the magnetic field. Like when you put a magnet with iron filings and you see that toroid, that's just actually lots of miniature magnets connected together. That's actually not showing you a true magnetic field. That's showing you a magnetic field of magnets. So he was the first person in the 80s to actually be able to map a true magnetic field. And a magnetic field, it's very yin yang. You have both a positive and a negative on the north, and you have both a positive and a negative on the south. And depending on the shape of the magnet, whether it was a bar magnet or it was a cylindrical magnet or it was a ring magnet, all created these different pockets of vortexes that would come off of it. And you would have one dominant one, but you'd also have varying weaker ones. And so when when David Weiss first like contacted me to try and figure out whether or not the flat earth was true, they were talking about the ring. And I was like, I've been studying ring magnets. I've been trying to order very, very expensive ring magnets for my water purifier.
And when you were in India, if I'm not mistaken, that was pretty much just common knowledge that we don't live on a ball, right?
When I was in India, I wasn't talking to anybody that was conscious. When I was in India, the ashram that I was in was a completely they were all Vedanta Advaita, and they didn't want any thinking to happen. So I didn't really fit in because I asked a lot of questions.
Maybe there's somebody else who told me that about India.
I think that was Mario.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's Mario. Okay, who's mixing up my homies.
Yeah, no, I was in India in 03, 04, and 05. So that was way before I was conscious to the flat earth thing. I didn't start to have like a thing with the flat earth until I read a book called Dark Mission from the NASA guy, Richard Hoagland, where he showed how all the photos were fake. And even then, I still thought we went. It wasn't until I actually had a neighbor in Costa Rica that was the JPL security chief, like their system security chief. And I was all into aliens. I believed all that stuff. And I would talk to him. I'd be like, come on, tell me about the aliens. Tell me about this, that, and the other. And he wouldn't tell me anything until I got high with him once. And then he gave me homework. He's like, Gardner, he goes, find a picture of the sun from space in the visible light spectrum. I'm like, easy peasy Japanesey, I'm doing it. And when I was in Costa Rica at the time, nobody had internet. You had to go to town for internet. And so every time I'd go to town, which was once a week, I'd go to an internet cafe and I'd be like, sun, visible light spectrum from space. And this was 2007. Darned if I couldn't find it. And I kept asking people to try and find a picture of the sun in the visible light spectrum from space. And that's all he ever said to me. And the second thing he said, he actually said one other thing. He said, everything that you see from space is animated. And then he said, my office was down the street from Disney. And he told me this in 2007. So it only took me 8 years to put it together. So in 2015, when David Weiss was like,
NASA rents out their motion capture green screen studio to Hollywood all the time for Hollywood movies.
Absolutely.
It's hilarious.
So Weiss was like, Weiss and Sophia Smallstorm were like, hey, check this out, grind on it and see what you can think of. And I was heartbroken because the second I saw the ice ring, what's considered the perimeter, I instantly knew that everything I'd been studying about ring magnetics was true. Because in ring magnetics, if you have a ring magnet and it's called radially centered, meaning when they actually center the ring, like if this is the ring, I'll actually put it like this. When they center it, they send the charge from the outside to the inside. So the outside, the entire outside is south. And then every point, let's just say 360 points, even though it's infinite. But let's just say 360 points, you have the north pressing to the center. Well, that creates a really cool thing in magnetics. It's called scalar north. So if you turn the ring like this, and you have all the norths pointing in, it creates a plasma charge, a scalar north, that's equal. Well, it all depends on the radius of the ring of the south, but it creates scalar north here. That's freaking Polaris.
Yeah,
instantly
you're explaining a monad. It's what it is, or it's you see it in the magnetron as well, don't you? That same sort of that's used in microwaves. That same ring.
Oh, I don't even know.
Very powerful. Yeah.
That's really cool. But I knew it just from Floyd Sweet's work. I was like, because my whole thing was my water purifier was putting water right through the scalar north. You know, sending it through a phase conjugate magnet array through scalar north. I was like, I'm going to reinvent the wheel. But so yeah, that to me, I was like, holy shit, this is true. So I had to, like, you know, within a couple weeks, like, weep and mourn the loss of space. Because at the time I thought, you know, that I was programmed to have my hope in space, you know. So
ever since Star Wars, just want to go on a Millennium Falcon.
I was more of a Star Trek guy. I have to admit, like, back in the day, like, Star Trek for me was much more my jam.
It seems like maybe the more intellectual thing. I never actually got into it enough, so I don't know. But
yeah,
Star Wars, like the more I'm able to analyze that, the more I see it's just like so base and juvenile.
Yeah,
and like hyper trauma based mind control in terms of the plot of that. So, but that's a tangent.
Yeah, you know, one thing to point out is the correspondence of the Star Wars story and the government agenda known as Star Wars. You know, for anybody who ever doubts that Hollywood and government is not hand in hand, it goes way further back than that. But that's just a good example.
Well, so I want to talk about, well, with your description of the ring magnet and how that applies to Polaris, I'd like to hear more about that. This particular theory of magnetism, or what can be demonstrated with magnetism, how that in a micro to macro sense can tell us more about the realm, you know, or at least give us the ability to make some educated hypotheses about the larger structure.
Well, it's really cool. Did you ever come across John Bedini's work?
No.
So John Bedini, he was you all have heard of Marantz amplifiers, right?
No.
Have you heard of the brand Marantz? Oh my God. so
like guitar amps.
Guitar amps, but they were really audiophile, very high-end amplifiers in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then when everything started to go digital, they had, you know, their market share dropped, but they got really popular because people loved the warmth of the sound that their amplifiers would make. And this is a side tangent. John Bedini was their competition in the 70s and 80s, and he was making crystal amplifiers. And so he did all these bespoke crystal amplifiers where instead of using vacuum tubes and transistors, he would, you know, use the piezoelectric nature of different crystals to actually be what tuned his amplifiers. Absolutely out of this world, brilliant man. Well, I took probably 4 of his online courses. I bought like every single device that his company made. I made his schoolgirl Perpetual motion machine. And his whole thing was like, we use the absolute BS side of electrical circuits. Every electrical circuit that we make terminates on itself. So it's always creating a short. And he was very much like Tesla in the sense that Tesla was very open to open circuits. So his positive and his negative rarely touched in a lot of his open circuits, where he would have a spark gap and he would create the what I call electrical cavitation. Yay, Emily. And John Bedini was doing the same thing. And he was, after he was scared into submission, he essentially just did battery reclamation things. So you're talking about the earth as an electrolyte, like the salt water and the salt bridge. He was so into this technology of being able to recondition any battery that has an electrolyte. And what he would show is in a regular charging circuit of charging a battery, you're just hitting the battery with amps, like full amps. And that creates a phase shift in the electrolyte where the electrolyte can only go in that direction. And if it doesn't get that consistent pulse, the electrolyte, I don't know all the terminology, the electrolyte just becomes less and less and less efficient, and it drops its capacity to carry a charge. And he showed where nature doesn't do it that way. The way nature does it is nature uses what's known as a sideband pulse. So it's a lot like the way if you're going to shock a metal into being a magnet, you know, if you're going to take a bar of neodymium and shock it and traumatize it, it makes a magnet. But yeah, now you have a magnet and it can do work in its way, but there's another way that you could coax that to do the same amount of work where there's an over unity aspect to it. And this is with the sideband harmonics. This is where musical stuff comes into it that I'm an absolute novice at. And he would just find the frequency ranges in which, instead of shocking the electrolyte so terribly with huge amps, he was like Tesla, where he would use voltage at certain frequencies and then use the harmonics off that to recondition the electrolytes and the plates within the electrolytes. And he was absolutely brilliant. He died, I think he died like 6 years ago. But his work with our charge, out of this world. But what he showed very simply, where I would say his biggest claim to fame in the world, which is kind of hilarious, was he trained, I think it was his neighbor's daughter. He showed her how to make a perpetual motion machine by using scalar north. And so what he did in the schoolgirl, they call it the schoolgirl, the SG bicycle wheel project, something like that. And all you do is you force two norths together. So you force two norths so that they're going like this. And we've all done that, where you push two north, magnets together, the poles, and you get them really close. You can even phase lock them if you want. And just right above that is this constant pulse that's 40 times stronger than the North Pole itself. And then if you have a secondary magnet on a wheel, it's technically not free energy because you have to have something to start the motion. So let's just say your intention. If you start the motion on the wheel will just spin indefinitely. And not only will it spin indefinitely, it will charge a battery at the same time.
That's actually really simple when you think about it.
And that was his thing. All these guys say the same thing, whether it's Keeley, whether it's Tesla, whether it's Bedini, whether it's Bearden, everyone I've ever studied, it's super simple. Like, I am not an electrical engineer. I'm I look at an electrical schematic for houses and I just like hand it off to my electrician. I'm like, I don't want to see that. Like, I've soldered engines and things like that for remote control cars and planes and stuff like that. Like, I have a very remedial knowledge from a technical perspective, but I've tinkered enough to know that what they're saying is true. And I'm a huge fan of pneumatics, and because I look at the world, even the electrical world, much more like it's about pressure gradients. Yeah, it's all these electrical pressure gradients, and what we call electricity. Like, I don't see in more current parlance, the guy that I love listening to is Kenneth Wheeler. He has the YouTube channel Theoria Apophasis. He puts it very, very similar to the way I see it, but he's so much more advanced than I am. Like Tesla said, all light is it's a perturbance in the ether. and I'm an ether guy. Like, I think ether is a real thing. And I'm definitely not in the modern physics world. I'm not an atomist, but I feel like much more akin to the ether physicists of yore.
Yeah, I'm sort of always sort of sitting in two worlds with that sort of thing, especially when I just look at the upper atmosphere, what they would call an ether, as a low pressure system. And so as soon as you have that low pressure dynamics, it really does change how the conductivity of things, the pressure mediation, as you say, all those sort of things start to play a significant role because you're reducing the pressure. And this is where you get into sort of plasma stuff as well, where you're able to create plasmas because you basically need three things. You need low pressure, you need heat, and you need a magnetic field. And so those sort of things are, start to be included. And that ether is somewhat like the absence of pressure in a sense. So that's how some of the ways I view it. But there's also this another way of viewing ether in a sense as a etheric electrolyte, and that's what I sort of propose that is up above us is basically a low pressure electrolyte, and electrolyte as a gas. So that's where I get these ideas that you're actually tapping into, or these other guys that are using ether as such are sort of tapping into that, or able to utilize the natural energy that is around us, basically.
Yeah, Ken Wheeler puts it very simply, and I really love his terminology. He calls this plane that we live on. He won't ever just come out and say we live on a plane, but when he has slipped a little bit, he's like, we live on the plane of inertia. And as a body worker, that makes so much sense to me, especially as an athlete, because like whenever I've had to work through my own things, or whenever I've had to work through somebody's myofascia, or when I'm in the presence of somebody that's carrying something heavy, it's a density, it's inertia. It is an actual inertia. And like the lighter states of consciousness that I've been in, there's less inertia. There's much higher momentum and much lower inertia. And so I really do think that what we consider materialism as the dielectric inertial plane, like we are literally on our heart chakra is the horizon. And that to us, we're the axis mundi of our experience. So as the axis mundi of our experience, the inertial plane goes right through our heart. And that is like the center, that is the core of the condensate of spirit. Like if spirit's coming down and up, it condensates along that horizontal dielectric inertial plane. So that's sort of the model of my cosmology at the moment.
Well, yeah, we're very similar in that respect, because I see the Earth as sort of the neutral ground as well.
Right.
When you look at the galvanic cell and see the Earth as a salt bridge, then it is basically got fluids moving through it, say like magma and the aquifers and things like that, and they're the electrolytes. But there's a joining together of the positive and negative that actually starts to stabilize or create Earth. And Earth is really just a function of positive and negative coming together to stabilize into a singular form, rather than something that's as you go up the scale into, from liquids to plasmas and things like that, then that is not so, the neutrality of it becomes less and less. But things tend to fall down as such because of their neutrality, and because of their buoyancy and density plays a role after that. But we're very similar. Earth is obviously an anagram for heart and those sort of things as well. So there is this, when you say neutrality, yeah, it's really the positive and negative coming together. So it's really that sort of mercurial idea comes into play again,
right?
With the Earth. Yeah.
So
is there any aspect of electricity, as you understand it, that could actually generate Earth beneath our feet, like cause soil to manifest from some kind of dynamic going on between the upper and the lower?
There's electrocrystallization, and that's basically where you're creating Earth or crystals. And Earth is essentially just a crystal, as far as I'm concerned, just broken down and weathered in a sense. But the same sort of things can grow with. I think they're like kids' toys and things where you'll have put it in salt water and then there'll be a crystal that grows out of it. So basically, that's how I think the Earth came about. You know, you got the four elements functioning, working on something, and then you got that crystalline
So like
growth.
that's why the ancients are
appears.
giving us the idea of the primordial waters.
And out of that, so Earth is secondary to those primordial waters. Yeah.
Topher, how does this maybe relate to the Nazi esoteric cosmology?
They believe we are like essentially in Swiss cheese. So they saw space as solid. And I dig what they're talking about, because it takes me all the way back to my Vedanta Advaita roots. So they essentially said what we think of as space everything's been inverted. And this has been, by the way, the only working model of a true plasma pulse engine is produced by a company called Kepe Motor in Brazil. And their prime engineer and scientist, Norberto Kepe, he actually wrote a treatise in the 70s, and it was called Disinverted Physics. Like, he wrote, it's awesome. Like, I got that like 12 years ago, and it completely changed my mind. But all we know when it comes to being an atomist is they tell us we live in a billiard ball universe, that the Earth is solid, it's a planetary body, and it's floating in infinite vacuum, yada, yada, yada. The Nazis had it the opposite. Where we live is actually the space. That's the bubble. It's like Swiss cheese. And space is solid. It's pure potential. And so to them, if it's pure potential, it's whole. This is the potentiated state. So it's a lower valence. It's a lower octave of creation itself. Like, if I'm looking at something, yeah, it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it's created, but it's not the whole. Anything that's temporal is temporary, so therefore it's not real. So when you're in the bubble, like when you're having experience and having a continuity, a temporal existence, that is just the finited aspect of your infinite self. So in these little bubbles that there are, you have different dimensions, maybe you have different planes of existence, who knows? But they were pretty convinced by the late 30s that the nuclear way of looking at things was completely moronic. And they got into vibrational technology, where vibration is location. Your frequency is your location. And I got really switched on when I was reading their work, because I knew a Raja yogi that had siddhis. Like, he had siddhas. He had 4 siddhas, or siddhis. I don't know how you guys pronounce it. But he could control the weather. He could change the state of matter. He could levitate, and he could bilocate. And I witnessed all of it. And I witnessed all of it before I even had a context for what it was. So it wasn't a projection from me. It was literally like, what the F is going on here? Like, what is going on? And
I know, man, I've had a spontaneous bilocation experience myself. So, you know, like I don't rule that out at all.
Yeah, so in that, like, I was like, there's something more to this whole thing going on. And I was in college when I first experienced it. So I was like, there's some, this place is wacky. And so from the Raja Yoga perspective, they literally, that's one of their tenets as a Raja Yogi is, your frequency is your location. Like if you were standing on the sun, you'd be plasma. Like you'd be the frequency of plasma. So like it made sense to me the second I was reading the Nazi stuff. And the only reason why I was reading the Nazi stuff was,
and you could also look at it like a vibrating string on an instrument, that the vibration at one length range of the string is one frequency, you know, like you're saying if you're on the sun, you're going to be the frequency of plasma. You're going to be that plasma, you know, that would be like that would be a certain note on the fretboard,
right?
No matter what, the vibration in that part of the fretboard is this thing in a way, but it's all on one mono chord also.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like all of our bodies are different. Like we all share similar biology maybe, but the whole thing that I see is that none of us are equal. We're all different. We're all unique. We're all living. I will never, no matter how much I try to know somebody else's experience, I cannot know in any way, like, even if they like detail write it and then like try and tell me, I cannot know what somebody else is experiencing. So all my Raja Yoga roots are very much like the center, the axis mundi, your Sushumna, that which connects you to your creator, your divine tether, is literally that low pressure zone. It's the center or the eye of the tornado that comes down, and then all action within the bubble of space that's been provided for the soul to experience temporality, that's what we're in. And then that tether goes to the holy, the fully potentiated state, which they saw as solid. And their whole thing was, if you really want to travel efficiently, all you do is change your frequency. And then that's why they developed the Nazi bell. Because the whole Nazi bell thing was about spinning Mercury, as you brought up, very, very, very fast with a massive, massive, massive ground current. I think they're using some of Tesla stuff with the telluric currents.
Well, if you use magnetism, Mercury spins itself.
Yeah, I have no idea how they did it, but they had literally the world's largest electromagnets ever made in that thing. Like,
yeah, you can use natural magnets near a strong enough, like just a horseshoe magnet, right? Near Mercury, close enough to Mercury. And the Mercury, if you have it in like a tube shaped container, it will whip around that thing and spin and it will light up too. So imagine if instead you had some kind of like technological electromagnetic generator device, something big, like an industrial, like those things that they use to pick up cars at the junkyard.
They did have that. That's what I'm saying. They had these massive, like copper, I don't even know what gauge you would call it. They were electromagnet coils that were absolutely magnificently large. That were they were actually in the struts that held the monorail thing up in the sky. It wasn't that big of a structure, but imagine in the 30s looking at this, it was like very futuristic. But it was like this ring. Once again, we're talking about rings. One ring to rule them all. They had this ring, and then they had these, I forget whether it had 3 or 4 legs, but within those legs, they had these huge, huge copper, Venus metal going down into the ground, and these coils, huge coils that were buried. I read some accounts up to 6 stories down into the ground. So that's 60 feet.
That's a massive differential. And I've said before that like the Earth is similar to a galvanic pile or a voltaic pile, sorry, and also like it acts as a capacitor.
Right.
Because that's what a salt bridge does in a galvanic cell. If you don't have the salt bridge there, you take it out. What happens is it goes to equilibrium too fast. It just burns itself out.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you have the Earth in the way, or the salt bridge in the way, it acts as a capacitor or a limiter on the whole cell. So it's actually able to generate that electricity over time. And I think the same thing is occurring in our world. But if they're diving down into the ground, like you say, they're increasing potential massively.
Yeah. So I think they were spinning that whatever that amalgam of Mercury was up, and they figured out how to teleport. And then, we have the story of what World War II is. But I've read a bunch of Joseph Farrell's books, and he believed in the whole nuclear bomb thing. And I have a history with that too. Elsie, like my grandfather was a nuclear physicist that not one day, like a nuclear physicist that actually worked for the US military. And not one day did he ever work on a so-called bomb or missile deterrent system or anything. So I have a very unique, I guess it's not so unique anymore, but they're like what we've been told about nuclear stuff isn't the truth.
100%. Yeah.
So yeah, I think the Germans, maybe it wasn't even the whole German military. Who knows? You know how things get bifurcated. There was a sect of the scientists that figured out how to efficiently transport themselves, and then whatever commenced.
Well, that is how you create levitation as well, is via basically your metals and creating a charge on the surface of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And people can do it at home just with like a bit of PVC pipe and some aluminium foil rolled up into little balls, and you'll get them to float around and levitate.
Mm-hmm.
So the same sort of thing could have been occurring when they were doing that as well. If you're saying they've got that much power to actually generate
Mm-hmm.
that much outside electricity on it, then it will levitate, no worries, transport, no worries.
Yeah, what I found so interesting about it was the fact that it just corresponded so much to the Raja Yoga that I had been exposed to. And then, like, we all grew up with like the Indiana Jones movies and Spielberg just putting it right out there in front of you, like how infatuated the Nazis were with everything India. And so it made a lot of sense to me when I started reading this stuff. I was like, yeah, this wasn't alien to them at all. Like, this wasn't, I bet you they weren't even surprised. And who even knows what Antiquitech, like some of the firebomb cities that were in Germany, like Dresden, like you look at the old pictures of Dresden, I mean, 2/3 of those buildings must have had Mercury balls up in their steeples or spires, whatever you would call them. Like, yeah. I'm totally of the opinion that the Antiquitech that was eviscerated in World War II was just a huge coup of the energy cartel saying, no, we're going to be petrochemical all the way.
Yeah, and Dresden, they bombed Dresden for extra credit. Like, the war was over, and they just didn't want those bombs to expire, so they just dumped them. And that city was amazing before that happened. It was a huge reset.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking before, like, the Mercury thing is really a deep rabbit hole, isn't it? Once you start understanding what it does, how it operates, as well as that Antiquitech and how that operates. I'm still no sort of further with my ideas on it. rather than. I just think we have a lot more to learn to figure out what they were actually doing and how they were putting it together. But I do know that people have done experiments with Mercury that just some are really fascinating. There's one where my friend Zach, he basically had a friend, and he was hooked it up to a radio. He basically had one of those Mercury light bulbs, hooked it up into an antenna, and was able to receive huge amounts of stations just from adding that Mercury component into it. There's other things that Mercury, there's been studies on it where you've had a cathode and anode at one end of a maze, and it's been able to actually find its way through the maze rather than something that would be in a straight line.
Oh, wow.
The Indians were able to harden it up using salt, and they'd eat it and cakes, and also have the little sort of statue type things. And they were saying, well, it's for communication, mental abilities and all this sort of stuff. With silver, if you put mercury in nitrate, you can grow silver crystals on it. If you put it into high voltage, you can create gold out of mercury. So some of these sort of things have led me to believe that mercury is in our atmosphere, goes up in, and is able to amalgamate and in the atmosphere and create the planets. So that's one of the theories that I put forth, is that Mercury is actually the creator of the planets via its ability to amalgamate and create gold, silver, and all these the metals, basically.
When you say create the planets, do you mean like the sonoluminescent sparkly thing in the firmament? Like when you say planets, what do you mean?
The wandering stars, if you like, or the luminaries, sun, moon, those
I understand that aspect of it, but when you say what are planets to you?
Metals.
Okay. Liquid metal, right?
Not necessarily. No.
Okay.
Let's keep going on this. Let's hash out, some possibilities of what these luminaries are. I like this.
I would love to hear what your cosmology is.
So basically, to simplify it, the moon is acting as the anode, the sun is acting as the cathode, and so there's a communication that exists between them. And you see that the anode in a battery will actually start to break down, and you'll see that same sort of pitting and things that occurs with the moon as well. So it's a breaking down, and then the energy is moving towards the sun from the anode to the cathode. And so there's basically an electrochemical operation that's occurring with nitrates and hydrochloric acids. So, and these are generated from natural reactions and elements within our atmosphere. A lot of it's generated by the sun as it moves over the oceans, is lifting up and refining that atmospheric electrolyte. So that's where basically the connection comes from. It's cycling around. And the other component of this is the dome that we're in is basically a natural creation from temperature. So as as you get further from the sun, then things cool down, and then it's like air becomes solid, and you get what's known as like solid oxygen, solid air. And with that solid oxygen, then you're basically talking about supercapacitors and all those sort of interesting things that happen when you get that shell. It's a reflective shell of energy in a sense, because it reflects magnetism, reflects electrical energy. So that's sort of the basis of what I've sort of been researching. I do a lot more on my YouTube channel.
So when you look at this combination of ideas about frequency being location and the pleroma aspect being kind of like a solid, the pure potential being something that we're a bubble within in terms of our realm. We're kind of like a bubble within the pure potentiation of a particular outcome that is not the everything all at once type idea. So this lends a lot of maybe context to the idea that we're in a creation, like what Lucas is describing about the firmament and solid oxygen and how it acts as a capacitor, that this realm, in terms of the way it is structured, the physical, is itself a technology, like a technological, you could call it, like, technology means art, but that it's like skillfully or artfully manifest in a particular way. It's not just chaos in a, it's got some order and some seemingly some intent behind the structure to give it a particular equilibrium in perpetuity, right?
Well, it's 100%, but it's our technology basically comes from the stars or from understanding where we are, and so it's just a matter of putting those pieces together. Say if you're looking at a vacuum tube, well, you're looking at a low pressure system, and you're looking at a cathode and anode in that low pressure system with maybe a little bit of salts in there, and there you have a communication device. It's a switch. So that is a direct relationship to what I think is going on with up above us as well, is that there's a communication via that low pressure system. So technology is a derivative of understanding our world.
I want to throw this out there. Me and Gabriel were having this conversation last night about, basically, I was throwing out the idea of, what if technology or human evolution past the point of being in sort of a homeostatic equilibrium with nature, right? This idea of hunter-gatherers and unchanging, untouched indigenous tribes that did things the exact same way for millennia upon millennia, until one day all of a sudden, like, agriculture came and new ideas about human life and ownership and property and language and all these things started to arise that step by step led us to here, where we're talking to each other on computers, from hundreds and thousands of miles apart. And basically the idea was that, it was just one of those big what ifs. But what if technology, or what if imagination is basically, find the best way to put this. What if you have to have the star or constellation language for imagination? Like, what if before humans, over however long it took, figured out what was going on in the sky clock in terms of a story, the astrologos? What if, like, before that there wasn't really invention? What if because what happens with the priest class, the astronomer priests, over time, over history, they look at that story that they've come up with about the constellations, and then they put that in context with the languages that exist, with mathematics, with other languages, and they look at the interplay and the wordplay and the puns and all the different things hiding under the surface level of meaning. And that's where they come up with crazy what seems like crazy mythology. Like, why would Samson kill 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass? Like, that is so completely out there. It's like, so it seems so random. But when you learn more about the Lumashi or the constellation writing, you find out that that has to do with a pun on a wordplay, relating to like Sumerian or Akkadian languages, how one word or one vowel sound or syllable sound can mean 3 different things. And so they're combining, multiple dimensions of meaning together to derive Samson killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass. And so that's what I'm trying to get at, is like this interplay and this priestly puncraft that is revolving around what's revolving above is also sort of the mother of invention, and maybe the mother of monsters as well. And my question is, like, I get like, it's a big roundabout question, big kind of stoner sounding thought, but you know, what if, or what do we think about the idea that we actually, the capacity to imagine and invent is itself derived from the sky clock, in terms of how we derive, like, is all science actually astrotheological? Like, was there really anything scientific that was ever discovered that was truly gnosis about how the world works, or an invention that's in harmony with nature, that didn't come from understanding, some understanding or wisdom derived from the stars, right? Is this making sense?
I'm thinking about the two forms of Freemasonry, operative and speculative. That seems to maybe be, you know, what Chance is talking about. The speculative having to do with, you know, mastering a language to describe how things work, and then giving us the ability to speculate on how to invent things, or how to apply what we have learned to speak.
Well, when I look at the galvanic cell, when I started looking at it, what I was noticing is that it was showing me, you know, when you look at an anode and a cathode, and you look at the simplest form of a battery, basically, which is two electrolytes and a boundary between them. And, you know, this is same as like what your heart is. It's, you got two different blood types, and then you got a boundary between them. It's these all just seem like fractals of the same sort of process to me. And so once you learn about one thing, and this is where I sort of bang on about the Trinity a fair bit, because it basically is a magnet. You know, it has a polarity and then a center point, which is the neutral point between the two. So essentially, you know, when you're looking at whether it's the heavens, it's just you know, they're a fractal of it all. So when you look at one thing, that, especially when it functions, and that's why I always sort of come back to these things, is because it's functional, it works. You can't say a battery doesn't work, because it does. We know it does. It just has these 4 elements put together with 3 chemicals, and then all of a sudden you've got power. So yeah, that's always come back to, that functionality.
Lucas, you gotta look into Bedini, man. You're gonna freak out, especially if you're into crystals and galvanic cells and the type of energy that really charges electrolytes well. Because we've been taught a load of BS when it comes to what current is, what ampage is, what voltage is. We've been given.
I feel like you're about to elaborate on this, but this is one of the things I intended for the talk, is like, what's the BS and what's a more accurate description of electricity? So, you know, go off on this. You know, feel free
you're
to
gonna love this. So my personal hero, Schauberger, his 100 questions to science, you know, he was like, well, your model for electricity makes no sense. You know, they had just started to pitch the electron model. And he's like, there's no way electricity can be a particle connected to another particle, connected to another particle. He goes, electricity is temperature differential.
Yep.
And so what you need to understand is you have to take a deep dive into what is temperature. Because when you say temperature to people, they just think of heat and cold. But when you really like start to think of the phenomenology of what temperature is, it's varying degrees of intensity. So once again, we're going into pressure gradients. And we're going into pressure gradients with a more solid medium and a less solid medium. And the the boundary layer, as you would say, like as the example that you just brought up, is where you get, for lack of a better word, I just call it cavitation. This is where Mother Nature, whatever this dielectrical inertial plane is, says, okay, whenever there's going to be a gap, I'm going to fill it. Nature abhors a vacuum. So you can do this within systems, and the system will collapse into itself, what we see and call electricity. That's what it does. It's like, no, there's a gap there. I'm going to fill it. Tink. And it does it. And depending when you do this, when you engineer this, have any of you guys seen David LaPointe's work?
No, but what this is making me think about is how somebody described, I heard a description of the germination of a seed basically causing a spark because of like temperature difference of how it was dry when it got buried, and then it rained and it got wet, and there's like a pressure and temperature differential that causes a cavitation spark, and that the seed uses that spark as what kicks off its biological process. And then once it's sparked, you know, like starting an engine, it goes from there.
It's pure.
Does that sound accurate?
It's pure yin. It's pure receptivity. Whenever the pure yin is created anywhere in nature, whether it's through a mechanical system or a natural system, where you have an area where you have ultra receptivity due to lack of, let's just say, resistance, boom, it gets filled. One way or another, it gets filled. Nature abhors a vacuum. In this realm, in this etheric realm that we live in, there is no such thing as emptiness. Like, it doesn't happen. So all these guys I studied, their whole thing was,
so if you don't have resistance to evil, you'll get filled with it.
No, that's gay.
Literally.
No, it's not like that. Like, oh, don't think of yellow, don't think of yellow. No, it's how should I say this? I'm not being too eloquent. The engineers that I've studied, their whole thing is, how do I actually create a vessel that will control how nature collapses the field inside the vessel? So I brought up David LaPointe, and David LaPointe's whole thing, like with the primer fields, you guys have to watch the primer fields. It got released like 9 years ago. And like now, of course, his technology has been, bought up by some billionaire. But his whole thing was, he created a point source light by using magnetic fields through an oscillatory circuit within a vacuum. And he was the first person to create all the full spectrum of light that we get from the sun in like what looks like a dome. It would be like this vessel, but domed and about this big. And it has all of the spectrum of light, visible light. It had never been created before by humans with very little electrical charge. So he had a cathode on one side, anode on another side. Then the cathode and anode like this, and then he had magnetic fields around this, and he would rotate the magnetic fields to change how the plasma was presenting. But what he was showing is he had these very specific magnet arrays that were convex curves that caused a plasma situation where when it was getting hit with the voltage, then that plasma, because that plasma was being condensed by the magnetic fields, would become sonoluminescent, would actually emit light. And he's found he could emit sound, he could emit light, he could pretty much emit whatever he wants to emit from this, depending on the frequency, the voltage, and the shape of these magnet arrays. So, and Schauberger was doing the same thing pneumatically. Tesla was doing it electrically. Their whole thing is biomimic. Mother Nature wants to fill the gap. She hates emptiness. She doesn't allow it. So Schauberger was doing it all pneumatically. He figured out these ingenious ways with gaseous mediums to like actually truncate the flow at very specific frequencies, where then when the cavitation pulse would come in, it would increase the speed to a point where he was always getting over unity with his rotations. So it's all, in my mind, in my simplified caveman dome building mind, it's all about how can I engineer the space, the ambiance, in a way that allows nature to collapse the field in a how should I say it, in an additive way, not in a destructive way.
That would be a great way to transition into talking about dome structures and other geometries, maybe. But what you're describing with the cavitation phenomenon, this is how some fish can swim up a waterfall, right? This is what vortex dynamics are really applicable to.
Well, I mean, I've seen that, but I've also like plumbed houses. I've also been in areas where cavitation like blew out pipes that were rated at like, 400 PSI. And there's no way you could have 400 PSI in those pipes. So how the hell did those pipes, go bad? And they went bad because it wasn't a pressure pushing out. It was something pulling it in, sucking it into the center. And so I've built probably 24 ram pumps. Have you guys ever heard of a ram pump?
Yep.
So
there is those. Have you heard of that? There was a guy building a cavitation sort of pump, and it was basically a piston, and it had a heap of little divots in the end of the piston. And as it went down into the water and spun around, it was creating those cavitations a little bit like. Anyway, he was basically producing heat and steam and getting over unity that way, or high efficiency.
Oh, it totally makes sense to me. There was an Australian gentleman that in World War II created something that looked like a little bell, and he would cavitate this bell and it would create boiling water without any heat. So he was creating steam engines this way with no heat. So he was way over unity. It's just the way nature does it. Our hearts are not pumps. Our hearts are actually like Dr. Thomas Cowan's work. And you can see like they can roll your heart out like it's this long piece of Lomito steak. And they fold it into 7 folds. It's a very specific way that they fold the muscle. And then you end up having the 4 chambers and then the aortic arch. And they show that the cavitation that occurs in the aortic arch is actually from the temperature differential from your extremities to your core temperature.
Wow, those are very sacred numbers, right, Chance? The 7 to the 4 and
7
an archway.
And 4. That gives you G to D.
That's pretty badass.
Also, the 7 and the 4 both are theosophical additions back to 1. So that
I don't know what that stuff means. Tell me.
So like 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. And if you do the same thing, add all the digits between 1 and 7, you get 28, which is a 10, 2 plus 8.
Okay.
And basically every 3 numbers for infinity reduce back to 1 like that. So the number line is sort of like saying 1, 2, 3, 1, 5, 6, 1, 8, 9, 1, 11, 12, 1, and then it goes on and on. It's like literally trinities forever in a sense, always returning back to oneness after the 3. And
that's so cool.
The 4 and the 7 are like that. The first 2 that demonstrate that pattern in, the 9 digits that we have, because everything past 9 is sort of like a repeat.
Yeah, and you said the aortic arch too is the sacred arc. Like That was just a very magical phrase that you just described the anatomy with. It was just steeped with magical implication.
I would like to internalize this information for sure about the cavitation that the heart creates as it's like a vortex technology.
A better way to say it is it's cavitated. That's the best way to look at it. When you build a cavitation pump, the pump isn't creating the cavitation. It gets cavitated. It's a very odd thing. It's actually your input energy that allows the cavitation to start. The pump itself, it's just reacting to the condition that you set in motion. And then once it's set in motion, it just does it. It will do it. I mean, as long as it's built well, it will do it indefinitely.
So you said something interesting, this heat differential between the extremities and the heart. I've made the correlation between the oceans and our blood. And so when you said that, I immediately thought, well, you got an outer cooler ring that we're in, and then you got the internal. And there is like that thermohaline circulation that occurs as well. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically the world conveyor belt of the oceans that moves around, and it seems to have this correspondence between nitrates and sodium. So there's always this sort of polarity going on between the two salts of nitrates and sodiums. So anyways, when you said that, I was like immediately thought of this differential in heat that occurs from, say the midsection of where the sun moves around the tropics and the outer ring. So
yeah, it's a corollary. And it's also like with men and women, like the whole like the whole yin yang thing, like the energy of the majority of the men, because I'm very yang. I have a lot of fire. I have a lot of Rajasic fire energy in me. So when I massage men, more men have that Rajasic fire positive polarity pushing out energy. So when I work on the male polarity, I'm like the overall male polarity, I can feel resistance in the field because it's two Norths touching each other. Where when I work on a woman, if she's heterosexual, the yin energy is there and it's actually pulling my energy into her. The negative component, the receptive component, the cooling component, the ultimate, it actually draws me in. So it's or my energetics, I should say. So it's a completely different thing. And sometimes you get a very yang based woman and sometimes you get a very yin based man. But I just see this temperature differential, yin yang thing, light, dark, it's so obvious. I mean, it's everywhere and it's very natural, and it creates the dynamic disequilibrium. And that is something I got a lot from Schauberger's work, is that in nature, you don't have equilibrium. If you have equilibrium, you have death. In a true symbiotic relationship, you have dynamic disequilibrium, where you will always have, just like Floyd Sweet's work with the magnets, is like every magnet pole has both the yin and the yang, but one is dominant. It's the same thing in dynamic disequilibrium. You'll have both present, but one is dominant. It doesn't mean the other one isn't there. And then sometimes the other one will dominate. And it's a very cyclical thing. It keeps everything in motion.
Yeah, and the other thing, when you're explaining hot and cold, there is the thermogalvanic cell, which is basically based on that. So you have an anode and cathode, and all you have to do is heat one side of it, and you'll get a transfer of electricity. So it's really is that simple. And when you put that in context of sun and moon, well, you've got the sun is hot and moon is cooler than the sun. So you automatically get a transfer of energy that happens between them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on the there was a comment from Andrea earlier, and she was wondering if we could relate what you've been talking about. I think relating to cavitation, and can we possibly relate that to biological cell reproduction? Is what she was wondering.
I'm getting absolutely, like, my mind is being pulverized by Dr. Cowan and
I gotta have Cowan on.
And for Dr. Andy Kaufman. They're essentially rewriting my mind when it comes to what our biology is. Finally, all the years of me doing myofascial release on people now make sense with what they're saying. So
I think Kaufman's going to be at Music and Sky, maybe.
Oh man, I
have access to both of those guys on Telegram. I really need to get into their work more.
Yeah, I've talked to Dr. Cowan a couple of times. I haven't talked to Kaufman yet, but essentially, if I'm understanding what they're saying, like the majority of what we've been told about cellular biology is absolute BS. Like the whole model that we've been given, that, you know, this cell is here and this cell is there, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. There was a reason why, like, from 2005 to 2015, like, one of the most dangerous occupations in the world was to be a cellular biologist. And it's because what they were figuring out was the majority of cells are pleomorphic. The majority of our cells are in constant communication, and the external part of the cell, the outside of the cell, is actually what writes the nucleus. The nucleus,
you say pleomorphic, like basically adaptive, could be one thing or another thing.
Pretty much all of them are adaptive.
So this actually ties in like crazy, and this is probably why you wanted to talk to Powers, because Matt Powers is seeing this going on with things like the bacterial world. How, well, like that's why calling E. coli is like a universal chassis to become anything that the environment might need it to become for some sort of balancing or cleanup.
I have to geek out with him because I make biochar. Like, my company's called biocharisma. I've composted everything in every part of the world. And I can tell you, there's no fucking way that some of these bugs come out of this compost that got into some of these vessels I've created. Meaning,
yeah, they appear out of nowhere.
They appear out of nowhere. The conditions create the being. That's why, like, you can have you change the conditions in the desert, and then all these animals just show up. We live in a hologram, man. Like,
so that means nothing we've ever been scared about, climate change or extinction events or any of that, none of it is as described.
No.
And the biodiversity of nature is as accessible as our perceptual bandwidth when not limited by fear and lack mentality. Basically.
When you're not limited by fear, you create the vessel of absolute abundance.
It's all an offer.
It's all an offer.
It's all an offer. This is what we were talking about last night too, Gabriel. Yeah, everything fear is an offer, and like the reality is, when you're in the jurisdiction with your creator, what that means is that you understand that the I am force in the unlimited, in the pure potential unpotentiated, is the same consciousness that is you. It's just like, you know, then all of a sudden there's actually nothing that could be a threat, nothing that could be a fear other than your own self-deception.
Yeah, and also, like, there's subconscious things that we carry from our apparent genetic line and people that we care about. Like, what I've noticed in the body working world is emotions flow downstream. So let's say you have a daughter and a mother, and the daughter is much more sensitive and open to things, and the mother won't look at her shit. The daughter will present all the mother's shit, and none of it's hers. Because she has the genetic link, she has the energetic link. She actually she's in phase because she comes from a similar line. She lived watching.
Topher, but what about this too? I have had experience with clients where we sort out energy inherited from one of the parents for them on the biofield level, and their parent involved with this will contact them within days
and be clear,
and they'll rectify the situation. Sometimes parents that they haven't spoken to for years.
Absolutely.
So it flows downstream, but it can be cleared from downstream and it affects upstream, so to speak.
Absolutely. And it can be retrocausal, which gets really freaky.
So then whenever, woo-woo new age people talk about like healing your ancestral line, you actually are healing your ancestral line potentially if you fix trauma that's inherited generationally.
In reality, why else are we here? Like, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the plasma balls. There's nothing new in the electrolyte. None of us are doing anything that's unique or special or anything. We are literally just here to heal our family. We're just here to heal. That's all it is. Like our soul depotentiated from the whole.
This is where you get the mythology of original sin of Adam and Eve, because if what you're describing, this is sort of a logical, but it's a more refined logic that the mystery traditions actually started out with before getting all off into, corruption. But like, this is a logical thing that you can reason out with enough time and enough generations of philosophers and sky clock study, is that you realize that basically what you just said is accurate. That the purpose of life, your spirit goes on. You're not, everything is recycled or reused. There's not an end. Everything comes back in its season, and that we're sort of working with the first time somebody lived incorrectly, started the chain reaction of, you could call it kind of like metaphorically entropy or decay, and we are at a long end of that that chain, with the possibility of backtracking or continuing the fall.
Well, it's just a product of polarity, in my view. As soon as you have polarity, you're going to have the gradient between them, and you can exist on any of that potential gradient. So that allows for the freedom, doesn't it?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you, Chance. Hey, Mr. Texter Chance.
No, I'm looking up a quote from Higgins, Godfrey Higgins, in Anacalypsis about this very thing, from the chapter Eternity of Matter and Renewal of Worlds. But ask away. Maybe I'll find this quote later.
When you're reading miasms in people's fields with the work that you do they come through consistently? Like, what I mean by that is, when you're dealing with somebody carrying the burden from, let's just say, a family line, have you had the chance, or do you have enough experience to know that, like, when you're reading a miasm in their bioenergetic field, it presents the same way all the time?
Presents the same way all the time. I'm going to answer this the way I think what you mean, but if this doesn't answer your question, then help me out, elaborate here. But for me, it's like, it started out when I got into it being a varied experience, and there's still some variety. And I'd be listening and trying to hear like a distortion in the tone, or for the fork to run out more quickly, things along those lines. And I would be interpreting all those things the best of my ability and intuitively. But eventually I got to the point where I was able to make sort of the agreement with my body that every time I would tell it what I'm looking for. And then when I found what I was looking for, my body would tell me with like a pressure differential, a pressure shift in my eardrums that would cause my ears to pop. And sometimes the clicking is deeper in my head, but that's how it works now. Every time, whether I'm looking for the outer boundary of their energy field or I'm looking for my miasms, as you say, miasma, as you're talking about distortions, same thing will happen. So that's like my measurement ability is in the feeling of a pressure change, pressure shift in my ears that causes them to pop. Not unlike when you're on a plane, but not painful, and it doesn't affect my hearing. So in that sense, yeah, it's pretty much the same way every time, no matter what I'm looking for. I get the, it's like a metal detector. Metal detector beeps for metal. That's how it works. I have that in my ears, in my head for dense or stagnant, stuck chi or energy, or barriers is a better way of putting it, because it also applies to the outer edge of the energy field, like the plasma membrane.
That's cool.
I'm still sometimes getting information from the tone of the fork too. That might give me a clue as well. But most probably biofield tuners are going off of the sound itself, like the pitch changes and how fast it runs out or how long it rings out. And for me, I pretty much get rid of most of that guesswork by just my head change telling me what's up. Is that so? That answered your question?
Well, in a way it did. I guess I can ask the question better. So when I use the term miasm, just so we're using the same grammar, the way I was taught to use that word is miasm is a contraindication that somebody's carrying that they didn't auto-generate. Like it actually came from a loved one or a family member.
Okay. So those, whenever it comes from like implanted from a family member, so to speak, I'm usually I usually just know. It's one of those things where it's hard to say, but like when I find the distortion in their energy field, if it is their own trauma, their own stuff, or it's a miasm, I have some clue about what it feels like. And I have some clue about the age it happened based on where it is at, the up, down, and the left, right, and the front, back. Those axes of the bubble space around them will tell me something specific. So, if I run into at the solar plexus level a feeling that is from about 11 years old and it's on the front left of the person, then it's going to tell me that at that age, for whatever reason, they took on the belief about themselves that they were absolutely powerless, or their will could not affect change, or that they had willpower problems. And other clues that I'll have maybe a lot of clues from how I worked on them up to that point that will give me more of a specific feeling or intuition about exactly what it means. But that's like the range of what things in that area could mean. And if it's happening at about 11 years old, well, probably it was a parent then, and probably it was their mother, because that turns out to be that the left side relates to mother, but also for whatever reason, we get our sense of power or powerlessness more or less put into us by our mother. And you'll notice this, that it's common for for moms to be like, oh, don't do that, you'll get hurt, or you can't do this, or that'll never work, or they throw powerlessness out like crazy. Moms do. And sometimes like feminized dads do as well, but that's more or less a mother thing. We can learn powerlessness from the father. It's a little bit different though, because it's more it's more of a active powerlessness, like anger, whereas on the mother side, it's more of a passive powerlessness in like actual passivity. But anyway, because of those metrics, that age specifically, that's going to give me a clue that it was put on them from somebody else more than self-inflicted. Whereas there's other places in the biofield where I just know, basically, like I can kind of guess. And then there's certain areas in the biofield that are specifically ancestral rivers of energy. There's like a vertical column on the left and right side. It's a pretty thin spot, but it's like the ancestral river. And sometimes when you hit that spot, you get a big hit. And if you don't know what that spot is, you might assume, oh, this is something that happened to you about 1/3 of your life ago, depending on their age. But it also might be ancestral river, which means a repeated trauma program from many generations over and over again. So yeah, it depends, but I usually get it on an intuitive level to know whether it's self-inflicted or inherited, and sometimes there's overlap in that as well.
In kinesiology, there's that I studied, there's the same process is called surrogation, and you can basically muscle test it through, and you can pick where you want to go in that, who it is, all that sort of stuff, just through muscle testing. So the same sort of occurrence does, well, the same sort of thing happens in this modality as well. But go ahead, Chance.
Well, basically, the body knows everything, and it's a matter of getting a language that you can talk to the body through. Kinesiology is a good language. Biofield anatomy works as a language. It's an intellectual scaffolding through which your body can signal you things that it already knows.
Right? Oh man. All 100%. Right. This is wild. So kinesiology is like yes or no questions, right?
Yep.
And I'm thinking very much, Topher, this is an amazing question, man. I mean, the timing of it is amazing. It overlaps with some of what we're doing on the Doctor Strange work that we just finished last night. We're talking about a specific type of a love spell in the collective right now, having to do with the family. And so a lot of what is signaling for me has a lot to do with Gemini, Germans, brother versus brother, germ warfare. And I think that in a very subtle way, all of these negative associations with brotherhoods is taking a toll on the collective family love connection.
I have to say, because I end up being like the sounding board for all my friends and clients. Every man that I know that's a father right now, they're all in a fucking blender.
Yeah, bro.
Like,
yeah, bro.
In different ways too. It's not like, and these are good people. It's not like they're like trying to make problems in their life, or they have, it's not like they have some sort of behavioral problem that's inducing a incoherent pattern in their life. Like these are, as far as I know, really good men. But my goodness, the level of like stress and change and like pressure that they're all feeling is amazing. And maybe it's just the station of life that I'm in right now, but I don't know. I've never heard so many of my male friends just be like, just under it.
Yeah, I've spoken to my kinesiologist, and she was sort of saying similar things, as well as, well, just on the feminine side as well, just from the process of dealing what's basically just occurred, in the last 2 years or 3 years, there's repercussions of that, and there's a sort of a delayed effect.
And it shows up in the biofield, actually, Lucas. Like like the metaphor I use is, if you had a forest fire and then you went and cut down a few trees years later in that forest, you would see in the rings of the trees markings where the forest fire happened in all the stumps. And there's actually like a spot in people's biofield that I call the cooties zone. That is a recognizable blip that is the same as if you had a forest fire and you were looking at the rings of trees in that forest.
Yeah, well, I know for myself personally, like it's been a real struggle. Just with lots of different things, like an accumulation of just issues that's had to come out because there was an extra pressure, outside pressure, working out what's going on, and then business pressures and all these other different things accumulating. So I can't imagine, I can imagine it's happening, everywhere in some respect, in greater or lesser extents, so
And it
yeah,
works out
especially when
great
you're
for me.
looking.
Like it pulled me out of some serious delusion and self-deception. And even though the dark nights of my soul from 2020 were not because of the psyop that was going on, but oddly enough, it was almost like that blender. Whatever was happening in the external was shaking up the individual's life as well and causing what needed to go away.
Gabriel, I want to hear a little bit more, though. I want you to expound on this because
it's huge, Topher. It's so huge. And to put it all together in, like, it sounds like more conspiratorial than I'm even comfortable with bearing the weight of. Like, I am totally open to the idea that all of what I'm thinking of is coincidental, inadvertent, not malicious. It's just the way our culture has formed over millennia. And the weight of it is coming to bear very heavily currently in our lifetime. And we chose to be here, and we're some fucking badasses for making that choice. But I'm gonna send a graphic to Chance that's actually in my phone, and I'm not having the best luck with Zoom in my phone doing this, so I might get zapped out, and I'll just jump back in. But I want to bring this graphic forward, and I will expound, Topher. It is huge, and it's just beautiful that you asked the question that was actually bubbling in my mind. I sent Chance the message before we even started the show, man. Like, you came in, yeah, you're right on the same page, and you didn't even know it. So let me do this, and I hope I don't zap out, but I'll BRB, y'all.
Cool. Lucas, what do you do for work? What's your occupation?
I've been for the last about 4 years organic farmer. So just I started basically a market garden right next to my house.
Nice.
And so I started doing that, and through all this sort of chaos that's been happening, a lot of the markets and all those sort of things got shut down, so my business didn't go so well. So lately I've been doing handyman work, especially because it's winter and we're just sort of coming into spring and things like that. Things are just starting to get going. So
is lettuce up to like 15 or 20 bucks a head now?
I don't know what it is exactly, but it's there was that time period where there was flooding up in Queensland and things like that, and things were going through the roof. But so I'm looking forward to this season being a lot better than the last two, and
Well, I'll send you lots of fertility vibes.
The greenhouse is looking good. I got tomatoes and everything, all that sort of started. So just the weather's been playing up a bit. We've been getting it's been really sort of wet here.
Wait, inconsistent weather patterns that don't really match the norm?
Yeah, I know they've been smashing us with the geoengineering. So.
Speaking of pressure gradients, my wife, we could have beautiful blue skies. They start spraying, and she immediately starts to get the headsy, like a start of a headache, because they change the pressure gradient. They're ionizing the space above us. She feels it immediately.
Oh yeah, it's a completely different feel that happens when they do it, and you sort of that's for sure.
That actually, I'm glad you said that too, because like 4 or 5 times today, I was like, what the fuck is my problem? And I realized they sprayed so hard today. They sprayed so hard, and they haven't sprayed in a very long time. It was the first time it was like, noticeable. And I just put the two together. I did felt like something was in the air. Maybe that was
There literally was something in there.
My orgone bubble seems to be holding, because I do see like a line of a chemtrail now and then, but they just don't hang, like they disappear in the space right around it above my house anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah. Hail Mitch.
Yeah.
So
I got your graphics ready, Gabe.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to start on?
Well, let's start on the second one to maybe bring us from the Doctor Strange paradigm and build into what I think has the potential to be like a very heavy spell. If somebody was going to harness the weight of what we're talking about, yep. The next one, the one with there we go. Yeah. So if somebody was going to harness the weight of this brother on brother animosity that I'm seeing baked into our language and our news. One other ingredient here is, Trump is a Gemini. And, that word is now a trigger for anybody, no matter which side you're on. It gets your preconceived notions get engaged just by that word. Well, he's a Gemini. So now Gemini is supercharged. We know about World War II. That's the sign of Gemini is the dose. We're talking about doses. You're going to get your dose. Did you get your dose? That's 2. And all of these things, when I started to see this pattern, I was like, oh, it's beautiful. It's sacred. I think in some context, it's speaking to our higher self, to our twin, our divine twin, our daemon connection. And by vilifying it, it kind of just makes it seem like it would be evil to get in touch with your daemon or to, ascend to your higher self or make those connections. So that was my first take on it. It was like, okay, it's just designed for psychological reasons to keep you from finding your higher self,
Are you connecting Deimos to the daemon?
Yeah, buddy.
Okay. That's the one they killed in the Marvel version of Phobos and Deimos.
Yes. So these two characters, we've sussed out. They are the children of Magneto, and thereby, and for other reasons, they are embodying the moons of Mars, which are mythologically the children of Aries. And so Aries equals Magneto. We're talking about magnets on the show here, which is pretty interesting. And the 2 moons of Mars are sacred twins in the the pantheon of the elders. So there's a lot of weight put on this germ, the hermanos, the brothers, the twins, Gemini, and right now, currently in real time, in the sacred number 2022, we have Mars in Gemini, and it's about to go retrograde on October 25th, on October 30th. It's the day that they count the ballots for the votes.
5 days after the eclipse, too.
And the eclipse is on the 25th. Now, just wait. Hold on the eclipse thing. Hold on, Yuko. Hold up. That was that's the big discharge. So the elections, the electricity of the elections, the volts of the voltage of all the things electric in our cognition, in our thoughts and our words, symbolically, it's all building up like a Kepri beetle dung ball. And it is so huge and so massive that it's really hard to even fathom can you zoom in on that bottom right corner with those 4 words for love? So this is what I discovered. The 4 words in Greek for love. I knew 3 of these right off the top of my head. It was the 4th one that I was missing. I was like, why don't I know the 4th one? Have I ever known the 4th one? Does anybody ever talk about the 4th one? We know about
Crowley it. Does.
No, I knew it.
He loves that word.
No. I'm sorry. The top. I knew agape, and I knew eros, and I knew philia.
I did not know storgy.
I did not know storgy.
That's the one that they keep from you.
I think this is a very important ingredient. Yes.
Yeah.
So Storgy so Doctor Strange is very correspondent with this word, Storgy, strange. Actually, Sergei in Russian is, I think, basically Benjamin, like good brother. It's another word for brother.
Can I add to your weave a few quick things?
Absolutely.
Storgy is phonetically like stork.
Nice.
And this is sort of the mysterious, hidden, obscured word for love of these other words that we're all pretty aware of.
Uh-huh.
The stork brings the baby,
Right.
because there's this mystery of where does life come from? Well, you just call it the stork. But also the stork is a word symbolizing the Pelasgi, who are the Phoenicians, who are the mariners, the ones who can cross between worlds or oceans or possibly even bubbles of the Swiss cheese. And we're talking about not a race of people, but an initiatory rank called the Hebrews, those who have crossed over. They are also the storks.
Yep.
So they're the hidden ones. Storgy.
It's the brotherhood. I think they
operate on family ties. Like their families they run things from a familial mafiosi type level. So stork. I think that there's some synchromistic connection there.
Yeah. And also I think what they're trying to hit on, and this comes from German mythology. We got Brothers Grimm. Well, I think what they're hitting on is Mount Hermon. I think the big secret to all these brotherhoods is that they're trying to tell you that they're from the fallen who landed on Mount Hermon and made of the secret pact to always be brothers and always share the liability of their sins. Whatever that is, it's really culminating right now in a major way. So I'm looking at this word storgy. It translates in English to affection. And I'm like, that word affection is hidden in a very interesting way. It's hidden in the word a vaccination. You take out say no. You take the word say no out of the phrase a vaccination. You take say no out and you get affection. So the word affection, if you insert the words say no in the middle, you get the phrase a vaccination. So somehow say no has been inserted into the word for love of your family and then ran rampant through the consciousness of the collective. So now a vaccination is the fucking devil. And so your love for your family has become the fucking devil, one way or the other. You hear what I'm
Yeah.
You are a racist, and race is a word that means family before it got applied to the way it's used today.
Right. Race means family too.
Anti-racists.
The
word literally means anti-family. Yeah.
So we're supercharging all these things that mean family. Now I'm going to take it one more step on this visual here. I'm now looking at the word birth certification. And there is a wonderful reveal here. And the word birth is a phonetic anagram for tribe. So it's your tribe sort. You're sorted in the tribe as to what is your affection, what is your family, what family
Let me back
are
you
you?
Up there, because the difference is an E and an H, but the E and the H are interchangeable between languages. Just look at the Greek letter eta, which becomes an E or an H when turned into English.
Right. So strangely enough, the word birth certification means the sort of tribal affection. And I do believe, and this is now, hold on now, let's get back, let's walk away from the birth certification, because by vilifying the birth certification, are we funneling hate into the concept of love of the family and the tribe? By vilifying this talisman and making the talisman evil, are we channeling some sort of distrust for our tribe and our fellow man? Fundamentally, the word birth certification is evil. Are we saying our love and our placement in the tribe is evil? And that's the role that so many of the men are feeling the weight of, in that dung beetle fucking ball of shit that is the present day in 2022. I think it has a lot to do with a bit of a linguistical snare that we've played a role in, whether we knew it or not. So, and I know that's a hell of a fucking dung beetle black pill to swallow, but it's important. It seems important, you know.
Well, this might be a little bit TMI, but we didn't do any of that process for our daughter, and I don't feel what my friends are feeling.
Oh wow, because you're not entangled.
I'm not entangled in that.
That's beautiful. Good for you, Topher.
And a lot of the stress that they're feeling, it is this word, this storgy. It is familial stress. Like all of us have, business things and all that. But a familial type of stress is a whole different thing because you can never get away from it.
That's so true.
Like
it's way heavier.
When you go home to rest. Like home is where the heart is. And if you can't rest at home, that creates a real problem.
I think Gabriel, what you're saying does make a lot of sense, that we're charging the talisman of the birth certification with the notion of like evil, basically. And then people that are entangled to it are feeling the stress in their storgy. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And
it's like basically it actually makes sense to how every other op, if you will, works in the realm, which is consent based. It's always consent based, that the theys never do anything to us. They get us to charge things up with our own intention and attention and shoot ourselves in the head or in the foot or whatever. So
because only those that have agape
works that way
have
all
power.
the time. Look at how like the right wing has been wound up to do exactly the job of the communism by being anti their own institutions, in the sense of like, you have all these so-called conservative YouTubers saying we got to dismantle the FBI. Well, what replaces that? Israel. Israel, one world government, control from that central location. Yep. And it's the demoralization of the institutions, and it's coming from people who think they're woke to conspiracy and that they are telling the truth and revealing the truth, but it's actually causing this self-destructive spiraling, Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of revelation of the method, more than some kind of karma of they'll get in trouble if they don't tell us what they're doing. I think they tell us what they're doing because in a way it like accelerates the whole thing. The more people are aware of it. And I don't know, I'm kind of rambling now, but interesting shit.
Well, if you bring up that next visual, what up, Juan? It's funny because we're in Libra season right now. We opened up talking about scalar. You know what I mean? Very interesting.
Right.
We're in. A lot of people will point out that the Libra is the only metallic, inanimate zodiac sign. That's a really interesting conversation. So I threw. What's that? Justice, right? And so in our Doctor Strange weave last night, we pointed out that he was in a land where they had Braille on the street signs, which indicated to us he was in the land of the blind. Mm-hmm. And he becomes the one-eyed man when in the end he gets his third eye opened up. So he becomes the king in the land of the blind. Mm-hmm. But we also, funny, like a pun that is in there is that the reality he was in was social justice world.
Ugh.
I know.
Hell.
Yeah, it was inversion world, literally run by a group called the Illuminati. Green was stop and red was go, and every other thing that could possibly be inverted was. And Braille is an anagram for Libra. Braille. And the whole area of that movie was an anagram for going through the gates of chaos or gates of hell, as the equinox point between Virgo and Libra leads you into the latter half, or the sea or the water half, or the underworld half of the sky clock. And, the movie was full of vernal equinox symbolism up to that point. And then you cross this threshold, and now it's all Libra symbolism because they can't do anything without the sky clock in those movies.
Yeah.
It's funny that she's related to Braille because, you see her depicted with the scales and blindfolded, but she's all about books. So
yep, exactly. So just a little while ago, we did a breakdown on werewolves, and I had this realization during that little project that Adolf means head wolf. And that is the name of a secret society. The Wolf's Head Society is it's their own society. But his name all along meant head wolf. And that's quite profound because he was very much into that Norse Germanic system of mythology where, the werewolves would run into battle side by side with the berserker bears, and we talked about Mark Zuckerberg and how his name is a berserker. So anyways, that was just a really fun project, but I've had it in my head for a while that Adolf means head wolf. And he led the Germans. He led the Hermanos, right? Mm-hmm. And all of these things are so supercharged and vilified. And
he was a eunuch.
He was a eunuch, exactly.
Right. He was smoking
meth. He was a catastrato.
Right. He was smoking placenta meth.
He had a
all
fupa.
Things evil. Yeah, totally.
Adolf's fupa. Just go look at pictures of him in his little shorts.
Yeah, that's great.
Chance, can you zoom into the zodiac? Because we are perusing over the head wolf minor decade of Libra right now. And when I looked this up, we're coming right over lupus here soon. I don't know what those teeny tiny, I'm not sure what those little zodiac signs are inside, but the corresponding one to lupus is Gemini. Mm-hmm. And that is so
because the twins are raised by Romulus and Remus found Rome.
Yeah.
Roma, they are raised by a wolf.
Okay, nice. So that's Romulus and Remus suckling on the wolf right there in this zodiac, right? And
exactly.
We're breezing through
and they
that,
were the
right?
law bringers, Libra symbolism. They founded Rome, so in a way they're like law bringers too.
Yes. I think of Libra is also Moses, the lawgiver. So this just kind of blew my mind that I'm looking at lupus, and I find corresponding Gemini right next to it, and that is so wild because of the Germany and the head wolf of Adolf. It has all these ingredients of Rome, and then can you zip down to the bottom there, Chance? Because just like Chance said, the eclipse that's about to happen in October, is that right? Yeah, October 25th. It rips not only through Germany, but it goes right through the Ukraine and almost all of Russia. And so we've drummed up all of this World War Gemini, World War DOS trauma, and it is going to be laid into a position for this eclipse to harvest all of that, whatever, psychic energy, some sort of discharge. But it's scheduled to happen right in time for these elections this year. And it just kind of blows my mind how all of this overlaps, connects. It might be a good thing. Like maybe this eclipse will roll through and we can all fucking move on with our lives and start to respect the fucking father and families again. And everybody can, heal and we'll all bounce back. But I just wanted to point that out, that there is something really heavy going on with Anubis, who is holding the scales. He's the head wolf, and here we are in Libra under his sign.
That's awesome.
Thanks for all that, Gabriel.
You're welcome.
I know we're getting a little close to Topher's bedtime, so I'm going to try to start landing the plane. But if Lucas or if you or Lucas have any further questions or reflections for each other, I would like to see any dangling chads rescued and hanged up. So,
well, one thing I will bring up is that when you start to look at a lot of the different inventions that with people that use oscillating circuits and that use electrical cavitation circuits, almost all of their inventions have the vessels in which they're compounding the energetic concentration are all domed, spherical, circular. It's all curves. Usually it's a hemisphere is involved one way or another. And
so your dome structures that you build actually cause a type of positive cavitation of environmental energy into the space, and they also help you with heat, like air conditioning without electronics or actual air conditioning.
To give you an example, I built a sound studio for a client 3 years ago. That was a dome. It was 21 feet in diameter, closer to 22 feet in diameter. So the ceiling of it was about 15 feet high, and he runs the AC because it's in Costa Rica. He runs the AC and dehumidifier 100% of the time because he's on the coast. That dome only pulls about $60 worth of electricity a month because it takes so little energy to keep everything, crispy inside. And so
it has to do with those what are called angles of sorrow not being present, right?
There's no vertices. And so it's also like, have you guys ever seen a solar cooker? Like where you have a convex curve and you have all these like strips of reflective material, and it will concentrate the sun onto like a pot and it'll heat the pot. There's something, it's very simple. It's like it concentrates, even if it's not reflective. Like let's say you're using a geological material like concrete, or you're using a conductive material like a metal, there's always a concentration. And Lucas, you really have to look up David LaPointe's primer fields, because he talks about the pressure gradients that are caused by the dome. And this is a conventional scientist, and he has at least with what he's put out on YouTube, he's never talked about living on the dielectric plane of inertia. Like he believes in a planet, spinning in space and all that stuff. But he literally has the most perfect model and representation of what we're going through, because he shows, like, he has all these incredible diagrams showing exactly what's going on because of the convexity of, whether you want to call it the firmament, whether you want to call it the boundary layer between, space and counter space, whatever. There is a boundary layer, and that boundary layer is hemispherical. It is a convex. And I've played with a couple of holograph machines. It was a while back. It was like 15, 16 years ago. And how does the holograph machine work? You have this convex curve. You have a hole in it. You shoot a point source light through it at whatever you're doing. And then above, you get this perfect 3-dimensional representation of what that is. And it's absolutely amazing. So I think there's some real biomimicry going on with all this stuff. It's like very apparent to me.
Yep. It's the dome plays a huge role in the formation of everything, really. And like I said, just a temperature differential creates it. So it really is very simple. Where the sun isn't, there's there's this solidification of air.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the conductivity of the superconductivity acts as a massive boundary, also able to levitate things and do all sorts of crazy things with it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely a huge component of an enclosed system, because I'm of the belief that we're in a totally enclosed system, and that energy just circulates, and it's neither coming in or going out, because of that basically that dome that's there. So no, I enjoy the discussion about these things, and any sort of insights I sort of try and take on board, and I'll definitely have a look at these primer fields and see what he has to say as well. So
yeah, primer fields 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 are like, they were earth shattering for me, literally, when I saw them.
Just make sure you two stay in touch, because I want to see what kind of things come out of you being friends. And Lucas, I'll tell you, both you and Topher are great to have as a friend, because both of you, I just will have very few people. In fact, it's mostly just these three guys right here. These are the three guys that I might actually just get on a phone call with and talk without there being in some other like business motive or reason. You know what I mean? So I would love to see you and Lucas take on a great friendship and come up with some great collaborations too, especially as your Biocharisma podcast goes further.
Yeah.
You want that to be once it launches, you want that to be a education for your daughter in the future. Well, Lucas can help with that. He's got a lot of great presentations and PowerPoints, and maybe a book someday, I'm hoping.
Oh yeah, man.
Yeah,
that'd be wonderful. Yeah, and we're bringing back to the market. We figured out the charging circuit for the orgone, let's just say orgone distribution device. And so yeah, like I guess that thing you see back there, pointing, that thing, that's a little holding tank of water with our little mojo cell in it, and the charging circuit working it. And yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff. And then Chance, I'm gonna be your neighbor like in like 14 days.
Whoa! How cool!
Yeah.
Wow. How close?
For now, like an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. Willow Springs is what, hour and a half from you?
Man, Missouri gets cooler every day.
I'm not sure, but you're also going to be really close to Aaron Snake Jones. He's in Southeast Missouri, and
he's all about Schauberger.
We're going to start doing some Missouri meetups.
Yeah,
get Gabriel out here. I know he'll come.
I think I did the Mark treatment to him at first. I reached out to him. He's never ever reached back. So I need some help with
the
that.
Mark treatment. That's the story of when I gave Topher Mark Steve's phone number without permission.
Yeah, he read me the riot act pretty hard.
He had just had a bunch of traumatizing phone number exposed experiences, so he was just like, "Fuck this guy, whoever this is."
Yeah,
they smoothed it out though.
Yeah, we're friends now, but it was like, oh well, I guess that's not happening.
That's funny. I got one hanging chat. I just was a thought that came through while you were talking about how temperature is maybe not. There's more to temperature than what people think.
Yes.
I had a friend who does helicopter transport to Antarctica.
Cool.
And it turns out something strange is going on around how people age in Antarctica. And I immediately went to the idea that temp equals both temperature and time. And wouldn't it be interesting if the secret to Antarctica and the reason we can't go out there is because it affects your aging? Or what if it even reverses aging?
Are they is that the metaphor of the cryogenic freeze to preserve you? Is that actually just going out to the outer ring?
That makes some sense, man.
Isn't that a trip? I just figured that was a hanging chat I couldn't let go by the wayside.
That
I
makes
always
sense.
associate heat with friction and current. So the more heat there is, the more current. And it's the same when you have an electrical circuit. You're going to punch a heap of electricity through it. You're going to get friction. You're going to get an internalization. And you're going to get current, and you're going to get heat.
And if time flows and there's less current, then maybe time slows where there's less heat.
Well, the supercomputers are crazy because what the supercomputer is, they try and get it down to absolute zero.
Kelvin?
Yeah, they're going negative 470 something degrees.
Wow.
They're trying to get it as cold as possible. And when I was really into like supercomputers, it was during my meditation days. And I had this metaphor in my mind for what it is when you do Vedanta Advaita, like the self-inquiry, where it's like neti, you're getting back to the fourth wall of your being, where everything that's ever happened happens in front of you. Even when you're thinking, even when you see behind your back, that's still in front of your consciousness. And I had this one time in meditation, everything collapsed. Like all experience collapsed. Being was there, but experience was directly in front of it. And then when I was coming back out of it, it was like, oh, that's the birth of the universe. That's the birth of experience. And it was like the metaphor for space. It was like being in an absolute vacuum, everything collapses down, and then coming back out of it, I had like access to everything. So when that occurred, and then I started reading about how they make these supercomputers, they essentially put some sort of circuit right in the middle of a deep freezer. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to collapse all the resistance. Because to me, heat is resistance.
Right.
Because like living in the tropics and then like living in a non-tropical environment, me being Rajasic, I already have enough resistance in my circuit. So when I'm in a hot area, I'm just more agitated. But when I'm in a cold area, I become a superconductor because there's less resistance. That's why I've always loved mountaintops. So what I think occurs is they like what they're trying to do on a mechanical level is they're reducing whatever ambient resistance there is, collapsing it through pneumatics, and then letting whatever that little fucking sensor, transistor, whatever that thing is, just read the field.
Wow.
And as far as I can tell, who knows what they're actually doing, but what I could read in like popular mechanics and popular science and all this stuff is they're essentially they're oscillating the circuit. So they're creating a microcavitation in a vacuum. And they're, hey, what data sets can we read? What, multiverse of Doctor Strange can we go into and then peer back at this vector? Because mass will always vector you back to here. So it's just a thought. It was just a crazy musing that I had in my meditation days.
Wow. That probably gets them into that ether.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I sort of make this definition between current and voltage, even though voltage is really explained as the potential difference between 2 points. I like to explain it as sort of like the way energy acts on something cool and compared to something hot where there's current. So current would be an internalization of the energy. You have to force it into something. Whereas the voltage sort of side of things, like or static electricity, more or less, is where it occurs and it wants to just flow on the outside of something. It doesn't penetrate in. So there's this sort of two opposite sort of things happening in electrical terms. The same substance, just different sort of operations of it. So I just find that fascinating. And these are where you can make comparisons between endothermic reactions and exothermic reactions as well. One's hot, one's cold, sort of thing. So just depending on what the electricity or how it's operating.
That's great.
216.
My computer was starting to overheat. The gravy was too hot.
Too much current. Too much current there.
Like that never happens, but it was starting to happen. So now the cats are invading the room. Let's land the plane, gentlemen.
Let's do it.
It's been a really good stream. I don't even think this conversation is really over. So, next
it's
time
never over.
Next time you guys want to talk energy and electricity, if you and Lucas get to talking, Topher, and come up with some big realizations, make sure you write them down and bring them back here. We'll appreciate it.
I shall.
Yeah. Thank you guys. And love you all. Thanks everyone in the chat. Been a really good chat. You guys have been awesome to keep an eye on tonight, and we'll see you all next time. Much love. Peace.
Good night.
Peace, everyone.